All right. Hey, we're going to continue in this series, New Life, where we've looked at 3 of our mission and vision statements for Blue River Community Church. We did know God, then love neighbor, then live justice. And this week we do the last of the 4, which is forever. Everybody say forever. Forever. When I was first brainstorming this, I thought about this might help you orient today. I ended up not enjoying the way it was laid out. But I originally had this as love God, love neighbor, love justice, and then live love. But I ended up not liking that. I liked forever better. But today is forever, or you can think of it as live love. That might help us orient what we're talking about a little bit. It's discerning truth and nurturing disciplines to challenge us from now until forever. Everybody say from now until forever. Right? From until perfect. Good. And we're going to be looking at Ephesians 4. As our scripture today. So if you want to open your Bible and just get it ready, we're going to be starting and stopping a little bit today. But Ephesians 4, it's the back half of your New Testament. I had to sing the song in my head this morning to find the bookmark for it. So it's, Galatians, Ephesians. But if you Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, both Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. Mine's 2052 in my Bible for 4. But we're not going to start there just yet. But if you want to find it. Chapter 4 of Ephesians is sort of in all of Paul's letters. So Paul, we've heard about him in Acts. We've talked about how he was a follower of Jesus that wrote a lot of letters to a lot of churches. And in chapter 4, what happens in a lot of the letters that he writes, it's a little formulaic. He spends a few chapters talking about the story of Jesus. So he'll say, here's exactly what happened. Here's the story that you've been told, this church that I'm writing to, this letter in this church in Ephesus. And here's what you've been told, just a refresher. Here's the story of Jesus. Then the back half of the letter is sort of so here's what you do with what this story is in this church that's having a problem applying this story to what's going on in your context. And so right in the middle of it, there's a threshold, if you think of it like that. So you have the first 3 chapters in Ephesians. He's telling the story of Jesus and in a lot of his books. And then you'll pass over a thing and suddenly it will become application. And that's what's happening in 4. He's going from the story they've heard and starting to apply this story to what's going on in their life. It's this link between 2 sides of this letter. So let's read for just a minute here. Chapter 4, verse 1. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling that you have received. So you see, we're trying. Live a life worthy of this calling. So let's live a life worthy of what we've just talked about. You see the threshold we're crossing. Good. We'll come back to it. That's not the whole thing today. Paul started a whole bunch of churches on his mission journey. He does 3 of them where he travels around the Mediterranean planting churches. And this is one of them in Ephesus. And what he does is he writes these letters to these church bodies. So he founds them, he starts them, he tells them what to do, and then he goes off on more journeys. And he'll periodically write letters back because he'll hear from some people there that maybe something is amiss in the congregation. And so he'll have a personal connection because he helped start the church, forming this church. And so he writes these letters to help fix something that might be going on. And so he starts to unpack the significance to the people of Ephesus about the death and resurrection of Jesus and about forming this new family. Ephesus has a very wide berth of people, all from different backgrounds and statuses and religions, and they've all come together now. And so he's trying to form this new multi-ethnic family of people that have placed their faith in Jesus and whose identity should now be grounded in him. This is the problem he's tackling. Ephesus, there's a lot of people with a lot of different beliefs, and they're having a hard time making this work. They're having a hard time blending this together. So chapters 1, 2, 3 is the story of Jesus, and now we cross, right? I urge you to live the life worthy of this thing you've been called to. And so 4 through 6, we're going to unpack it. And it's a really challenging read. Let's just go for a few seconds here, and you can get what I'm saying. Some people think this is the Paul at his worst. This is just over-obsessive Paul. Here we go. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, Father of all, who is over all and through all in all. Not so bad. But to each of us is given grace as Christ apportioned it. This is what it says. When he ascended on high, he took the captives and gave gifts to the people. But what has he ascended? And he goes on and on for a while, and then at the very end of it, he says, "There'll no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and craftiness that people have deceived. Instead, speak truth in love. We will grow and respect each other and mature those who's the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together, every supporting ligament grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." That's so good so far. Way to go, Paul. One body, Christ at the head, let's work together. But then Paul keeps talking. "So I tell you this, and I insist on it, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in their futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding, separated from a life of God because of the ignorance that is due to them and their hardening of their hearts. They have lost sensitivity. They have given themselves over to sensuality, to indulge in all kinds of impurity, and they're full of greed. This is not the way of the life that you learned when you heard about Christ and taught him in accordance with that in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former life, put off the old self, which is being corrupted in deceitful natures, to be made new in an attitude of your minds, and to put on your new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Put off falsehood. Speak truthfully to your neighbor. Forgive one another. Don't anger and sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're angry. Don't give the devil a foothold. Anyone who's been stealing must no longer steal, but must work. Do something useful with your own hands. They have had something shared to those in need. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what's helpful to building up others. And don't grieve the Holy Spirit, and for whom you were sealed on the day of resurrection." Get rid of bitterness and rage and anger and slander, along with any other form of malice. Be kind to people and compassionate to one another. Forgive one another, just as Christ forgave you. A lot of don'ts, and do this and don't do that. There's some people, like when you read commentaries, like, this is Paul feeling like he's a little overbearing, like a helicopter parent a little bit. Like, hey, by the way, don't do this, don't do that. Also, don't do this. Also, I just thought of this. You should probably not do that either. Also, this is bad. Don't do this either. Don't. Did you hear Paul being a little don't-y in there? Good. He's really pressing the issue, and it gets even more pressed into more chapters, into some really nitty-gritty details of living a life. It gets real specific. What does it mean to live out your life in a day-to-day in the reality of these three chapters that we've talked about before, right? You've all just read this, Ephesus. Now here's what this looks like in the nitty-gritty details. Paul's going to get real specific the farther you go. There's no stone unturned as he addresses daily life, relationships, circumstances, and he's going to place it all in the good news of Jesus. He talks about anger. He talks about marriage. He talks about parenting. He talks about money, what you do with your money, about how people lie, about how we should tell truth. We should be kind to one another, how you should really have a good work ethic. Every aspect of a life you could think of is explored in the last couple chapters here. It feels like a thou shalt not ending. And again, the commentaries will be like, Paul feels like he's kind of at his worst in these sections, because he comes across as like the moral police. You know, he's not just giving vague general. He's like, also this and 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 this. He's an overbearing parent. There's too many rules. You hear what I'm saying? Good. It was okay when Paul was talking about Jesus and how we should love each other, and that's really great. That's really awesome. But he's getting a little into my business over here about how I work, how I save money, how I raise my children, how I love my wife, how I do all those things. It feels a little like, can I get a little space? But if you go right into the nitty-gritty of what he's doing here, I think it's the most important thing. It's easy to read this letter of Paul that he just has this like wide concern with people, but there's a whole core thing happening here. Because if you pay close attention to the things that he's most concerned about, it's not just people's behavior. It sounds like it's people's behavior. But he's addressing a core source and motivation for the reason we behave. Paul has this ongoing conviction that our behavior, the way that we act, is not just something that happens here. It's not just the visible surface level version of it. That's just the way that we observe how people behave and treat each other and the way that we talk. That's just the surface. That's generated from something deep inside of us. And Paul is getting into this belief here. So he wants to get right to the source of our identity. So Paul believes that the way that we behave is generated and flows out of who we think we are. The kind of person that you think you are. The kind of worth and value that you think you have or don't have. So the sense of who you are makes you who you are, and your identity is what's going on right after you begin to realize that. And he directs it right here. And it's so easy to jump right over it. We're going to look at the coolest verse in the letter, I get to decide what we look at now. It's exciting. 4:17. I think it's the best verse in the whole chapter, and most people will just read it and move right on. But we're not going to do that. Here we go. 4:17. Are you ready? Best verse in the whole book. Here we go. So I tell you this, and I insist on it, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do. Isn't that fantastic? What a verse. That's good, right? Did you catch it? Did you see what he's doing? What's this book called? What book are we reading? Ephesians. So he's writing to these people in where? What's this city called? Ephesus. Okay? In this region of Ephesus. And he tells these Ephesians in Ephesus that you can't live like the Gentiles do. How many of you will read that and go right on to verse 18? I do. Yeah. Good. He says, we're going to live a life worthy of this calling and the good news. I insist that you no longer live like Gentiles. How many of you this week have used the word Gentile in your daily conversations with people? I'm the only one. Darn. Okay. It's an ethnic category. Okay. It means not Jewish. That's all it means. It just means non-Jewish people. So if it's a specific word, it originated in the Jewish community to refer to people who are not Jewish. If they're not Jewish, they're Gentiles. So there's Jewish people, and then there are non-Jewish Gentiles. Good. It's a way to refer to literally every ethnic group that is not Jewish. In other words, most of humanity. So don't live like the Gentiles do. Don't live like how most everybody else does. But Paul, let's see, who's he writing to? Let's go backwards. Make sure I'm not lying to you here. We're going to turn backwards. Chapter 3. For this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner of Christ, for the sake of you, verse 1 in chapter 3. Anyone got it? For the sake of you, Gentiles. I'm a prisoner for the sake of you, Gentiles. How about, maybe we're just a little contextually wrong here. Let's go to chapter 2, verse 11. Therefore, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth. I'm writing to you because I'm in prison on the account of Gentiles. But then all of a sudden, later on, let's go back, chapter 4:17. He says, you can't live like the Gentiles anymore. But if you're an Ephesian, if you're in Ephesus and you're reading this, you're saying, oh, well, Paul, I am. I am a Gentile. And Paul's writing to the Gentiles in Ephesus, and he says, don't be a Gentile anymore. And you're like, but I am one. It would be like Paul writing a letter to the church in America, which is a frightening thing to think all the way through about. And he says, by the way, don't live like Americans anymore. But Paul, I live in America. I am an American. He's either mindlessly contradicting himself, which I think of Paul slightly higher than not grammatically and rereading his papers to make sure they're consistent, or he's doing something super subtle here. Paul would know, an Ephesian would say this back to Paul. They would read this and they go, Paul, I am a Gentile. What do you mean? You're talking about Gentiles as if they're something completely different than me. And Paul would say, exactly. Exactly. They are different than you. Paul's saying everything of what chapter 1 through 3 is about that your identity, right, is no longer who you were, but if you're a Christian, if 1 through 3 has changed you, then your identity is no longer this ethnic or nationality background anymore. That's not you anymore. You can't live like them anymore because you've seen this, so let's do something different. For Paul, you're not Jewish and you're not a Gentile anymore. You're something completely new. And he's going to call this a new humanity. And in just a couple verses forward, he says this is a new humanity. You're a part of this new humanity that began with this new human, had a great name. He lived a couple years. His name was Jesus, who lived and he died and was raised for us. And what he's doing in just the first sentences right there in 17, don't live like the Gentiles anymore. He's addressing the very sense of identity that the church in Ephesus has. Their problem? Too many identities, too many backgrounds, too many beliefs. He says there's one head, one person, whatever. Don't live like them anymore. This is his direct address to this problem. The whole chapter, the rest of this book, is so specific commands about not lying and not having anger. And he begins by saying, look, your primary identity is not what it used to be. Because you have this new identity, you're a Christian that just happens to be Greek, or happens to be Roman, or happens to live in America. You're a new human in the new human, in Jesus. People see Christianity living, and they think it's like we're terrible reputation, but we're like the moral police. That's like our reputation. I don't know if you talk to people who are totally not Christians somewhere, and you're like, I'm a Christian. Like, oh, great. What am I doing wrong? Oh, what are you here to be mad about that I'm doing? What are we not doing right? And we're all in just this community where about behavior change, this reputation. That if you do this, you're a good religious person. But Paul is talking straight against that. He'd say, wow, you missed the boat entirely. The whole point of this thing is that it's a change from who you are that then begins to flow out of you into totally transformed behavior as you grow more and more into Christ. So Paul's challenging these people to be who they really are. Forget, you're not them anymore. Be who you are. And here's kind of how it looks like practically. Behavior follows this identity change. So Paul right here is saying, I insist that you not live like them anymore because you're not them anymore. So in Ephesians 17 through 19, let's just read this here real quick. So I tell you this, and I insist on it. You must no longer live as the Gentiles do in their futility of thinking. They're darkened in their understanding, separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is due to them, due to their hardening of their hearts. And having lost all this sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality as to indulge in every impurity, and they are full of greed. Paul is painting a pretty bleak portrait of non-Christians. He's describing people who are so lost, they've lost sensitivity to what even right or wrong is. Their futility of thinking, they're so darkened or ignorant, not that they're stupid, he's saying their moral foundation is so broken that they're calloused to morality. They can't even feel or sense what's right or wrong anymore. It doesn't say callous, the Greek is closer to callous. Does anyone play guitar in here? Yeah? I hadn't played guitar for a long time before I started playing at the beginning of July. And I didn't have calluses on my finger anymore. And when you play guitar, you push on it enough, it really hurts your fingers for a while. If you watch me in a couple weeks, I'm going like this, trying to make my fingers feel good. But the longer you play, your skin builds up calluses on your fingertips. You get really hard calluses, then you don't feel anything anymore. Or if you work out with your hands a lot outside, you end up building calluses where you're always gripping a hammer, or if you're always doing those things. Gymnasts will have horrible calluses all over their hands so that they don't feel it anymore. So he says they're so calloused, they can't even feel it anymore. That's completely worn over. They're in a place where they're so hardened to the well-being of other people that they make decisions so that they don't have to feel anymore. They're so callous for it, I don't even want to sense the problems anymore. 4:24. To be made with new attitudes in your mind and to put on a new self created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. When you hear the story about Jesus and the good news about his life, death, and resurrection, it's like truth that invades a reality, right? So he's saying, look, you have this view of the world that it's fine, right? You're in charge of it all. You're the master of your own domain. You make the decisions. If I don't want to notice that people around me are whatever, I can ignore it. I don't have to feel it. I choose not to. I callous myself over so I don't have to feel those things. It's fine. It's great to be in charge. Who likes to be in charge? I do. Being in charge is great. But then he says this gospel comes along, and it says, actually, you're not in charge. You're just selfish. And you're self-focused. And you're compromised to what you were supposed to be. So much so that you don't even understand who you're supposed to be. And you're suddenly exposed to this decision of God to love and commit himself to us, despite the fact that we are calloused, broken, and pretty much failures in what we were called to do. That's what he tells the people in Ephesus. You hear this truth about Jesus that you're taught to think about the implications of the good news. And you're opened up to a completely new way of living. And you're taught three things when you hear this Jesus thing. Three things you can pull out of it. You put off your old self, which is corrupted, calloused, and lost. You put on this new humanity, right? This new attitude, new mind. And you put on this new self to be like God in holiness and righteousness. Now the word there, if you see it, it says, put on new self. We're going to learn a Greek word today. The word there is actually anthropos. Everyone give me an anthropos. That is a great word. And there's probably some people in here who can tell me what that means. Maybe you've heard anthropology. Not the store that is very expensive, but like the study of humanity, anthropology. So put on a new humanity. There's where we get called this new humanity with the new human. He's talking about a self, but he's talking about your humanity as an individual. The whole of chapters 1 through 3 is God forming a new humanity in Jesus. And Paul's saying, you got to put that on and put off the old self. That's what you were taught when you heard this, to get rid of the callous, broken old nature and put on this new humanity through Jesus. And it should reshape all of you to start from ground zero again and rebuild your whole life and the world in the view of God and the people. A renewing of everything that you are. A new journey that some might say lasts forever, from here till forever. It's a new journey, following Jesus with a moment. It happens in a moment. You decide that I'm going to put off my old self. We're going to put on a new self. God's going to be in charge. This is a decision. But Paul's saying it's this perpetual renewal, over and over. A new way of thinking, adopting a new identity. And it's forever. You're consistently discerning truth, nurturing disciplines. You're challenging yourself from the moment you say, I'm a new self, I'm not a Gentile anymore. I'm a new person, and that is a decision to make every day because it's easy to become selfish again. To become more Christ-like is a daily decision. This is based around 1 John 4, 16 through 18. All of our things are based around there. It says, so we know and rely on the love that God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. And this is how it is made complete among us. In this world, we are to live like Jesus. Paul says you're no longer supposed to live like Gentiles. I'm going to say a few things, and I want us to say them, and some of them you'll say really easily, and some of them you might not say as easily, and that's okay. But these are the things we say to ourselves over and over to keep saying, put off old self, put on new self. I was this, I am now this. Are we ready to say some phrases that might be challenging? Some of them will be easy. Some of them will not be hard. We no longer live like Gentiles. All of us in this room, I think, are Gentiles. I don't think anyone is from a Jewish heritage in this room. So say it. We no longer live like Gentiles. Good, that was the easy one. I'm not even one of these, but I'll say I'm no longer a Huntingtonite. That's where I was from. But you will say, I'm no longer a Columbia Cityan. Is that what you are all? Is that what we call ourselves here? Columbia Cityan? Sure. Let's say, or an Albionian. Or a South Wesleyan, whatever it is. Ready? Here we go. I am no longer a Huntingtonian. Got him? Good. Here's one. We'll no longer live like Hoosiers. No longer live like Hoosiers. No longer live like Midwesterners. Like Americans. Like Westerners. Like Earthers. Like a Democrat. How about like Republicans? Or insert other party that you affiliate with. Like a Reformed theologian. Like an Arminian. How about no longer like a Wesleyan? Or a Baptist? Or a Methodist? Or non-denominational? Like Catholics? You're not them. You're not any of those. They're sub-identities. You're a new human, but I will live like a new human in the new human. Forever. Daily decision. I'm going to say it today, and then I'm never going to tie all the bows together anymore. Sometimes I don't like to tie bows. Sometimes I like to make sure people go, what did that have to do with anything? And then maybe you think about it. and maybe it'll come together. When I used to work at Epworth way long ago, one of the morning sessions, we had a big biohazard symbol that we cut out of plywood and painted sparkly red. And as they came in, there was a loudspeaker blasting Aerosmith's Living on the Edge as people came in. I don't know if you've ever heard Living on the Edge. I might play it as people leave. It's loud, and it just blasts in their face. And I had someone go, "Why are you playing that?" And I said, "Maybe I'll put it together." We never even addressed it. It was just there. It was just like a piece. It was just hung in the room. So I'll tie some bows together today, and then in the future I'll be like, "Boy, he does weird stuff." There's always a bow. I just won't even say it. In our video, what was happening? Painting a little deer. It was a canvas that was being painted on and formulated over time. It's like it started as something, and then it was given some new expression, and over time its picture was made more and more clear. Or maybe we're a canvas and clay, and we have an artist and a potter that works forever to form us into something new that was made in an image. Or maybe God's not finished with me yet. Or my testimony from death to life. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. It's like the theme for today is that we are something, and we're being constantly worked to become something else, with the master in charge forming us into what we should be. There's always a little bow. Maybe we'll look for some bows in the future. But that's this idea, this foreverness, that if we can be willing to say, I am no longer who I was, and I am willing to step in each day to become more and more, from now until amen.